If you live in a city, one thing you can't escape are vehicles.
Vehicles dominate our senses in every way possible. Think about it. The loud sounds, the traffic, vibrations, the smell of soot and your lifespan shortening, the unsightly visual of exhaust fumes billowing out of tailpipes. These sensations are as synonymous with vehicles as they are with the city itself.
You see, if you live in North America, the city around you was designed for the car and the car only. It was a choice. But buying a $30,000 depreciating asset is just a necessary evil of living in the 21st century. It just had to be this way, right? No, it doesn't. And actually, things can be different. That was just an intro. This is what's happening here, and a show about how our cities shapes our lives.
Hey, my name is Tosan. I have a bachelor's degree in human geography and also do stand-up comedy on the side. So that actually means I'm strangely qualified enough to be your host for this 6-episode season where we take on all of the urban planning issues in Edmonton. Why Edmonton? Well, we did a lot of research, okay? So we did all the research and we tried to find the most average city in North America, and Edmonton came up. Edmonton's all the way up here in Canada within central Alberta, which is the capital of the province. The city is a government and educational hub for the region. We have a hockey team, the Edmonton Oilers. You may have heard of them. If you're outside of Alberta, you probably haven't. And a mall that is bigger than it has any right to be. If you're not from Edmonton, you ain't safe either. The last few clips weren't even from Edmonton. This is Detroit, this is Detroit, and this is Detroit. These aren't Edmonton problems. These problems are continent-wide. Edmonton is my home, and it can feel mundane and average here at times. I'll be the first to admit that. But that's actually to our advantage for this season. If I was in Paris or London and I was telling you about bike lanes and new zoning regulations and all like the changes that are happening within their neighborhoods to, make people there happier, you wouldn't really care, right? You would just be like, oh, of course Paris is doing that. Of course Tokyo is implementing a new cool railway line. But if I told you that Edmonton, just opened an LRT, or Edmonton is building a new revolutionary neighborhood on the old municipal airport, then what's your city's excuse? But okay, let's get back to the point of this video. Cars. If you're not too familiar with Edmonton, one of the things that you may know about Edmonton is that it's the capital of the oil-rich province of Alberta. It wasn't always this way though. Before the vehicle, Edmonton city streets were defined by the streetcar.
The Edmonton Radial Railway was established in 1908. They brought the streetcar to Edmonton. I can't overstate how revolutionary this was, because we went from horse and carriage to the 21st century by establishing electric streetcars. This totally revolutionized how the city grew and developed, because they could build neighborhoods around this transportation method. That's why if you look to the downtown core or around Wyatt Ave, it's a grid layout, because that grid was the way that streetcars moved around the city the most efficiently.
I'm Damien Collins. I'm a professor of human geography at the University of Alberta.
Do you know the reason why those streetcars were removed?
Across North America, including in Edmonton, the great majority of cities did remove their streetcars. A few held on to them, and I think they value that today. Toronto, for example, San Francisco, New Orleans. But for the most part, cities had the view that streetcars were an old-fashioned technology, that they were holding up vehicles, they got in the way of the motorist, and that the space that they took up on the road would be better transformed into a lane of vehicle traffic. And so that kind of idea that the streetcar was old and slow and unreliable compared to this modern invention of the automobile really contributed to its demise.
The grid was not perfect. It could be stale or repetitive, and it could be unsafe because vehicles were traveling too fast. But there are ways of mitigating this, such as using traffic calming, using more creative architecture. There's no need to throw out the baby with the bathwater. So grids were better for the people, and it was better for transit. So what happened? Cars happened.
My name is Kaylin Anderson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Urban Development Institute for the Edmonton Metro region. Every community across the entire world, its urban form is a reflection of the dominant transportation opportunity that was available at the time it was developed. So in cities that are hundreds or thousands of years old, You'll see very different transportation patterns than you will in more modern cities that have really just developed over the last 100 years with accelerated growth in the last 50 in particular. And that's really Edmonton's condition. We're just over 100 years old, really, as an urban center. And most of our growth has occurred since the end of World War II, which is exactly when the private automobile was the dominant transportation form and still is today.
See, when vehicles first hit the scene, there was an issue: the grid. See, the problem with the grid, that the same grid that was great for public transit, great for walking, great for cycling, was actually a hindrance for the vehicle. One of the things that are notable about the grid are these multiple intersections that you see. So the grid is actually defined by the numerous intersections that are strewn throughout it. And these intersections are actually very good for pedestrians as well as for transit and cycling and different ways of moving around the city. This is because those forms of transportation typically move slow enough and traffic flow isn't as important for them, because for a bus, they're stopping frequently anyways, and for a person or a cyclist, multiple intersections don't necessarily slow you down too much, whereas having multiple intersections would slow down a vehicle. And also the grid was actually defined by its density. Grid neighborhoods tend to be more dense than suburban neighborhoods, so that's why transit works a little bit better in grid neighborhoods, because the amount of people that it takes to support these transit lines or these subway car lines or these streetcar lines are actually present within grid centered neighborhoods. Grids are also great for businesses as well. You can imagine if you're a business owner and you had a shoe shop, multiple people walking right in front of your store with every single hour, increasing the likelihood of somebody popping in to grab a pair of shoes. It's not a big deal for you to go on a walk and pop into a store, pop into another one. You only tend to stop your car at places that are the destination you were intended to go at the beginning of the drive. Part of the reason what makes a walk fun is the serendipity of it, and popping into that bakery or that cafe isn't that big of a deal. And that's of course great for local businesses, especially those businesses that may not be the top of mind because they don't have the same brand awareness as a Walmart, but those businesses tend to thrive in those walkable, rich community neighborhoods that tend to be more grid layouts, because these stores typically rely on the person passing by, and the person that's passing by on their feet tends to stop a lot more than the person that's passing by in their vehicle. Just so you understand, the adoption of vehicles was very quick in Edmonton. In 1954, there was 130,000 vehicle registrations. That almost doubled to 250,000 just 6 years later. The urban landscape needed to change just to accommodate the vehicle, introducing Noel Dant, Edmonton's first urban planner. He was tasked with helping Edmonton deal with all this influx of growth. So he implemented this, the modified grid. This changed everything, and this was first implemented in the neighborhoods of Park Allen and North Glenora. One of the main goals of the modified grid was to reduce car traffic, and this was done in different ways. For example, roads were made wider to make it more comfortable for drivers. Sharp turns were replaced by long sweeping bends. Limited exit and entry points into the neighborhood to reduce people coming in and out of the neighborhood, and reduced number of intersections to improve traffic flow. But all of these things that made it easier to drive made it more difficult to walk around in the neighborhood. And that was in addition to not just the roads were different, the land use was different. So beforehand, residential commercial uses were a lot more intermingled with each other, meaning that certain amenities were only a couple minute walk away from where you lived, like a church, school, grocery store, etc. However, because people were now going to be driving more to their locations and driving becoming more popular, these locations would have been inundated with car traffic and parking issues. So these amenities were removed out of the neighborhood to elsewhere. So if people wanted those things, they would drive to those areas and not through residential neighborhoods. This did make sense. It did reduce car traffic and make these neighborhoods a bit more pleasant to live in. But if you lived in this neighborhood, you essentially needed a car to get around.
This is the neighborhood that started it all, that prioritized the car over everything. Thank goodness that didn't catch on.
Through the 1950s, Dant's formula was repeated in more than 40 inner-ring suburbs that were built just outside the city's rectilinear core. Sherbrooke was cited by the American Society of Planning Officials as a model of good subdivision design. Planners across Canada began looking at Edmonton strategies and trying to emulate their success. So we have an environment with very little public transportation, and all the new land being built is being built with only one form of transportation in mind: vehicles. You can see how all this led to our current addiction to cars.
Wait, is this for like the TELUS STORYHIVE?
Yes, it is.
But hell yeah. All right. Anyway.
Hey, cool. Well, that makes me even more nervous. Great.
No reason. Just a guy talking about dependency on cars.
Okay. Do you drive?
I do not, but she does.
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
What's the reason that you don't drive, and why does she drive?
I feel like weirdly in Edmonton I don't need it. The prevalence of sort of Uber it came up right when I had the option to drive, and it's so much easier to just. Also, I live in Old Scona where I can walk everywhere. I live 11 blocks from my work, which is in the winter an arduous walk, but still a very manageable thing. 3 blocks from my gym and 2 blocks from a grocery store. I don't need anything else.
Why do you drive?
I moved to Alberta 8 years ago, and I lived in Stony Plain and Spruce Grove, and I worked on my nav, so I had to drive. And now I have jobs all over the place. I'm a professional photographer as well, so I need it to get places that Ubers will not go.
Because if you need to drive, she could just drive you around, right?
Yeah. I mean, it happens. It's nice to have my own personal Uber driver.
I'm the Uber, yeah.
Yeah.
He doesn't rate me very well, though.
Oh, yeah. 2 stars.
Not fun.
We're in an environment and a culture that essentially punishes those who don't drive and only promotes vehicles as the only legitimate way of getting around, which isn't fair because people choose not to drive or people don't drive for various different reasons. They could be too young, they could be too old, they could, be going through a medical issue, they could just not want to drive, they could not be able to afford a vehicle at that time. Well, these are all very legitimate reasons why somebody may not want to drive, but if they're in Edmonton, they're really out of luck.
Driving has given you a level of access that you wouldn't otherwise have had.
Yes, I would say access is granted thanks to what we have. Basically, in terms of just the ability to just hop downtown instead of wait 20 minutes, think, is it worth like a $25 Uber ride down to head to West Ed? We can just hop there and go catch a movie. It's a little easier.
There's 2 main types of costs when it comes to automobile ownership and use. There's the personal or private costs. So those would be things like the purchase cost, fuel, insurance, maintenance, and all those things can definitely add up to be pretty significant. And then secondly, there's the more social costs that are borne by society at large, from the taxpayer funding the development of roads through to, as I mentioned, things like air pollution, noise pollution, accidents. And so, when you add up those 2 sets of costs, we begin to get a real sense of just how expensive our commitment to driving is.
Have you even told somebody that you don't drive for whatever reason? If your car's in the shop or something, and you're just like, hey, yeah, I don't drive. And they look at you like a cancer patient. They look at you like, how is this physically even possible? Are you a responsible adult? And that shouldn't be the reaction you should get if you chose not to drive. There's many reasons why people choose not to drive. And driving is also extremely expensive.
My name is Pablo Orozco. I am a civil engineer by training, specializing in transportation engineering. So in my mind, inequity is when you're forcing or you're creating the conditions where everybody has to move around in one way. And you can talk about car dependency that way. If we create our city where people have to do that, for me, that's not equal. It puts a larger burden on people who don't have the means to get a brand new car, which is already super expensive. I just bought one and I decided to buy a used one because there's no way I can spend that much on a new car.
The alternative is public transit, and we'll talk about public transit in the next episode. But just as a cliff notes, public transit can add hours to your travel time due to the inefficiencies that I mentioned earlier in the video. I don't need to tell you that cars are expensive. It costs between $8,600 and $13,000 a year. This is the cost of entry for you entering the workforce, for you picking up your groceries, from you picking up your kids from school. You pay your taxes, and then on top of that, you pay another $13,000 for the privilege of you being able to go pick up your groceries or go pick up your daughter from school. That doesn't really seem fair to me. A survey outlined that 67% of respondents stated that owning a car opened up income opportunities that wouldn't have been available otherwise. Furthermore, 58% agreed that their car enabled them to find or take on a better or new job. The impact was particularly pronounced among low-middle income earners, with 84% of non-car owners in this group having had to turn down job opportunities due to lack of vehicle access. 84%. 84% of people who didn't own a vehicle had to turn down a job due to them not owning a vehicle. Which, okay, if some of those jobs were Uber delivery driver or, parts delivery driver or something like that, that makes sense. But I would be willing to bet that a good chunk of those jobs, maybe 20, 30, 40% of those jobs that were turned down was just due to lack of access. Do you see how this is a reinforcing cycle that gets worse and worse and worse? It goes beyond just a car. It is inequitable. Like on a society level, it isn't fair that we have to own a vehicle for us to be able to participate in the economy or to be able to participate in our neighborhood or in our communities. Often those who don't have vehicles need these jobs the most. Due to our car-centric layout, it's just not an option for them. Owning vehicles is inherently bad. I own a vehicle. But vehicles being the only option? I don't know. Does that sound fair to you? Does that sound like a community or city that you would want to live in? Cars aren't just expensive for people. It's also expensive for governments as well. The government is planning on spending $1.7 billion on road infrastructure between 2023 and 2026. $1.7 billion, which I'm sure you know is a lot of money, which doesn't take into account car accidents or any other money the government may spend on stuff that is ancillary to vehicles as well. Utilities, sewer lines, schools, fire stations, all of these city services that every neighborhood needs are spread more thin due to car-dependent infrastructure, because car-dependent infrastructure is inherently more spread out because you need more room for parking, you need more room for the roads, and also people are willing to drive a lot farther than they are willing to walk, obviously. So this spreads everything out, making it more expensive to service these communities. Think about all the space that we dedicate towards storing vehicles.
This right here is a parking spot. It costs at least $7,000. And it can go up to $60,000 for a single parking spot. And you might, we need parking. We need to store our vehicles somewhere. Okay, not too bad. But what if I told you 50% of the parking in Edmonton is not needed? 50%. So that's like $200 million that could be used towards anything else is dedicated just purely for storing of privately owned vehicles.
We devote huge amounts of urban land to the storage of private vehicles. So we could look surface parking lots, parkades, on-street parking. Those would be 3 examples, as well as all the private space around our own homes with garages and things like that. So yeah, vast amounts of urban land are dedicated to parking. And of course, when that happens, it can't be used for something else, right? So there's a real opportunity cost. And so how did we get here? Well, like other cities, we used to have parking minimums. And so when you were establishing a new business, you were mandated, you were required to provide a certain amount of parking for your customers or your clients. And that greatly added to the cost of doing business and slowed down development as well.
To me, I don't know about you, but that sounds a little bit unfair, a little bit inequitable, because that's money and resources that could be used towards something else. This parkade is built out of steel and concrete and resources that could literally be used to build a myriad of different things. The land underneath this parkade could be used for housing to help with the homelessness crisis. It could be used for schools, libraries. It could be used, for literally anything else. But instead, it's purely dedicated to storing vehicles. And as you can see, there's nothing here. There's only one vehicle here, and it's mine. That's it. There's literally nothing here. And this is how most parkades are most of the time. because they're built in case we need parking in that one peak event of the year. Every building that's built is mandated to have parking by the government. The land around that building is dedicated to parking. It means that everything's more spread out, which means that you have to buy a car to get around because things are more spread out because of the parking for the cars. Do you see the cycle here? Do you see it? Okay, so right behind you is the Ambrose House. So this is a building that was built to help people transition out of homelessness, get a place to live and things like that. And so you would think that that place would need every dollar that it could get. What if I told you that they had to spend $1 million on a parkade because of things that were mandated by the government? $1 million that could have been used for, more units, for more staff, for, more support, had to be dedicated to a parkade that remains empty. I'm not sure if you knew this, but people that typically live on the street, they typically don't own vehicles. Well, not many of them do. So it doesn't really necessarily make sense for them to have a parkade. I'm not saying that we need to get rid of parking entirely, absolutely not. But I'm saying this overly dedication to parking often leads to these kind of scenarios where money and resources are allocated towards the wrong thing. Do you see it? Because this same cycle is a cycle that also keeps people impoverished because of the financial implications of owning a vehicle. Car ownership isn't just about the inconveniences of driving. It's just ridiculous. I don't know. I'll drive.
Driving is just sitting for extended periods of time if you really think about it. Sitting at home all day, just to sit in your car, go to work and sit for 8 hours, go sit in your car to go sit at home, isn't the best for your health. Who would have thought? Cars are not good for people outside of vehicles either, obviously. They spit out toxins out of their tailpipe, which isn't really good for the air, or if you breathe it. It's not really good for the environment as well. You might have heard about this thing called global warming. They also create noise pollution. Often people don't even realize how much noise vehicles make until they're gone. It makes it hard to have a conversation with people or even hear yourself think when some bozo chopped off the muffler because it sounds cool to them. Also, if you get hit by your car, you don't tend to do too well either. So I just want us to make sure that we're fully aware of all those trade-offs. You may feel that I'll never change my mind about my vehicle. I love my truck. I'm going to drive it to the day I die. Good for you. But I'm also not saying that we should burn our vehicles to the ground and walk around barefoot and sing Kumbaya.
Especially because I was very negative when I came into this episode. I was like, cars suck, da 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 da. And then the more research I did, I was like, people responded to what was happening at the time. And if it was this new technology that whipped people around, also in the light of the issues that other cities were facing at the time, I think they made the right decision for that time.
Vehicles are bad for the environment. Vehicles isolate us from each other. Vehicles also have tremendous benefits of being sometimes a very efficient way of getting us around. This isn't an all positive or all negative conversation. Everybody's opinion absolutely deserves to be heard when discussing how we move around our cities. That's why I tried to have multiple different people's perspectives in this video. All I'm saying is that we've created a tiered system in which other forms of transportation are subsidizing car infrastructure, which isn't serving everyone. And the people that is serving isn't even serving them well most of the time. Movement within our city was decided 30, 40 years ago. And now we've just been going along with the flow. Even though that our world has changed, our technology has changed, and most importantly, we have changed. We value different things than when Park Allen was first created. We value different things than when Mill Woods was first created. We desire different things. And I just want our cities to reflect that. Peace.